Well, welcome everybody to the Human Capital Diversity and Talent Management webinar. The main theme behind this is the fact that we are seeing at the moment a global human capital challenge and concern and issue, problems, all kinds of things. It varies from country to country, but overall, almost every country is experiencing a massive problem finding the talented people they need with the skills they require. Part of this comes from because of the pandemic, of course. Part of it has come from the changing patterns of our work, changing demands, and changing things that people want from work, which again has also partly come from COVID, but some of the issues are much longer. Things like long-term problems getting the right IT staff, new working trends, new skills that are being needed, increasing amounts of IT being used, which is changing the kind of skills we need, and therefore more demand for things like human and transferable and soft skills. And further issues at the moment with a loss of older people from the workplace who are deciding that they would actually rather downsize, go and do something else, do consultancy, things of that kind, and people delaying going into work because they're spending longer qualifying and going to university and things like that. So there's a whole load of different reasons, and some markets are very, very different from others. But overall, it's creating a massive skills shortage that is affecting companies and all types of businesses, all sectors, and also internal audit as a function in itself, and massive risks for organisations as a consequence. The background to the overview was that the ECIIA and in particular 11 institutes of internal audit across Europe put together, here is the thing about who is the ECIIA, put together an overview looking at the issues based on conversations with roundtables and interviews with a range of different people in different sized organisations across Europe, asking them how they actually were dealing with the issues, whether they were auditing the risks in their businesses, how their businesses were dealing with it, and how internal audit itself was dealing with the changing demands for talent and the problems getting talent at the moment, whether they were looking at training, whether they're looking at diversity, whether they're hiring more people from the business. There's a host of different things they can be doing, but whether they are doing them and how they're doing them and how they're approaching them, and whether their businesses are actually putting it high enough on the risk agenda. The ECIIA itself represents 34 national institutes of internal audit across Europe and the Mediterranean basin, and covers about 48,700 internal auditors. And its mission is to be the consolidated voice for the profession of internal auditing in Europe, to promote the role of internal audit and good corporate governance by dealing with the European Union, its Parliament and Commission, and any other European regulators and associations representing key stakeholders. It does various advocacy activities, including webinars, responding to consultations. It produces papers such as this one. It runs committee meetings, it does surveys and runs forums and conferences. The format of today's session is going to be a series of questions and answers with our two key speakers. Our speakers are Marta Luaces-Calpe, who is Head of Audit at AXA Europe, Latin America and Africa, and is located in Spain. And she has, obviously with a worldwide organisation, quite a large team located in different places around the world. And Dermot Byrne, who is Head of Internal and EU Audit in the Department of Public Expenditure and Reform in the Republic of Ireland. He is at the other end of the extreme in a public sector organisation, and I believe he actually said just now that his entire ministry is about the same size as the internal audit team at AXA. So it comes from a very different perspective, very different kind of culture and background, and a different country, to try and get a sort of cross-section of how the different issues here are playing out in different places. My name is Ruth Prickett. I am the editor of Audit and Risk magazine for the Chartered Institute of Internal Audit in the UK and Ireland. So that gives us the background to who we are. There were also going to be a couple of poll questions that should appear on your screen. The polls are being organised by on Slido, so you can join it at slido.com #humancapital, and we'd be very grateful if you could take part in that. We will be recording the session, however, the only things that will be used from it will be like headline stats and figures, and maybe some of the statements from the speakers, or maybe some sort of common themes. We will not be identifying any speakers or people by name or by title. So please be free at the end to submit your questions and to discuss issues without any fear that it may be quoted somewhere. There are also CPE points available for the webinar, so if you'd like these, then please join the webinar with your first and last name, and you'll be able to receive that. So without further ado, I've already introduced Marta and Dermot. I think that we should probably move on to the first poll. Poll number 1 is, in which of the following areas do you perform specific audits? Do you perform specific audits on the culture of the organisation, talent management, skills developments, diversity, and HR management? If you could please put down any and all of the ones that you currently do specific audits in, that would be really interesting. And then we will speak to our speakers about how they perceive these. Not to do HR management. That is interesting, because in some of our round tables that wasn't coming out that strongly. We found that quite a few people said they struggled to get HR management onto the agenda as an audit with the audit committee and management. Culture of the organisation, I'm guessing, is a lot higher than it would have been 5 or 10 years ago, which is encouraging. Diversity is still quite low, and that's something we are going to be talking about quite a lot in this, along with skills developments. I mean, obviously, specific audits are not the only way in which these are covered. We are well aware of that. So it might well be that things like diversity don't appear highly as a specific audit, but are actually still audited in many other ways. Responses are still coming in. Not sure at what point we know that it's complete. We've got 132 so far have responded. 133. I've lost the poll now, but I think that was clearly showing a really big lead for HR above all the others, and diversity was consistently quite low down, as was skills training, which is interesting in view of some of the findings in the report and the kinds of things that were coming up in the roundtables where we discussed it. So the first part of this session, we were going to look at how we can attract and retain internal auditors and what the report and the overview suggests on that. So Marta, remote working has become particularly popular since COVID. It's something that was already on the agenda for a lot of organisations, but has massively taken off since COVID, the COVID pandemic lockdowns began. Do you see this as something that helps CAEs who are trying to attract internal auditors?
Well, in reality, COVID has changed a lot our lives. There are many employees that are rethinking their careers, and they are taking advantage of the opportunities that some entities are giving them. And for sure, this is a potential opportunity to get auditors from worldwide. But at the same time, it's very difficult to find the profiles and to work in this new hybrid environment. And why so? Because it's difficult to manage people in remote hybrid way. It's difficult to establish individual clear objectives for everyone, because not anymore is possible to manage by presence. And especially because there is much more difficult to have loyalty, commitment, engagement to a company in this hybrid work. And this is a concern. We have had in our company some people that were recruited during COVID and that left during COVID, and you have never seen, they were never in the offices, they never met the team. And having this kind of team feeling, it's more difficult now than it was before. Then it could be an opportunity. It could be considered that is a big world source of talent, but in reality, we are finding a lot of profiles and it's not so easy to find the right ones. I don't know, Dermot, how you see it, but for us, it's not so the parallels.
Yeah, very similar, Martha. I think it helps in attracting new people to your team, but it doesn't help in keeping them, because it's equally very easy for them to leave your organization and move to another organization in that scenario of home working. In Ireland's public sector, and indeed in this ministry, we're moving to a model of 3 days in, 2 days at home if people wish. Now, that may not suit people who have developed a new household way of working, particularly, you know, people with children perhaps, etc. And indeed, I, for the first time, met one of my staff yesterday who had joined my unit 6 months ago. So it doesn't help the culture in the sense that they don't get to meet the rest of the team in a personal way every day of the week, but it has also made life very efficient in terms of meetings, etc.
Yes, and the problem in audit is that bigger rotation means that you have to train more people and that you don't get the profits of all the work that you did. Then really it's not such an advantage considering everything.
Yeah, I think the danger for me with this new structure of 3 and 2 days is that staff may move to organizations, perhaps in the private sector, that are more flexible in letting people remain at home and work from their kitchens or whatever.
I think also it's quite interesting that there are differences across Europe on this. In the UK, I know that civil servants are being asked to go back and work more in their ministries, whereas across Europe, I think everyone's being asked at the moment to work from home again because to save power and fuel for getting to work. So I think because of the war and because of the power coming from Russia. So I think there are big differences again here as well in perceptions about managing people remotely. But on the attraction side, presumably it does at least mean you can hire people from much further afield, but people can hire your people from further afield too. Marta, what do you find your experiences are about mobility within the company? Are you seeing many people being promoted from within the company and going up into the company from internal audit and vice versa?
Well, I think that this is really the challenge, to have a career path for the auditors and to ensure that if they want to go to other places in the organization, it will be possible. Before talking about that, I wanted to tell you that the good advantage that we have in AXA is that we use English as a standard corporate language, and that we use the same methodology, the same processes and tools worldwide. This helps a lot in the geographical mobility because any auditor working in one country can go to another one, and he doesn't need to be trained in anything different because we are working in the same way. Then this is a big advantage for the geographical mobility inside audit. Also, we are doing a collaboration in transversal audits, and then even not going to another place, even being in your location, you can collaborate with different teams, and this is very interesting for the auditors. About mobility to the business, we have the vision that really there has to be a career for professional auditors and for people that wants to go to the business. And we want to impulse and to promote the rotation between audit and business. We don't have the typical just audit skills auditors. We have also a lot of people coming from the business to refresh the knowledge, and people from audit going to the business. And we think that this is a good way to give a different career path to our staff.
Dermot, how have you found this? You obviously have a much smaller team. Do you find that there is much mobility, or do you find, I mean, with small teams, it can obviously be very hard to promote inside internal audit. Do you have much movement between other civil servant jobs and audit, or do you have trouble sort of providing the kind of career path that people now demand? We're being told more and more, I know, that that recruitment consultants and people are saying, that people are looking for opportunities when they go somewhere. Now, a big decider when they approach an organisation is, what is it going to do for me? Where will I be in 2 years' time? Where will I be in 6 months' time? What will I learn? How will I develop? As well as what will I be paid? How much holiday do I get? And the obvious things that everybody wants to know.
Yeah, to use a similar analogy, I mean, all of the auditors in the government sector in Ireland would be equivalent to, say, Marta's team, you know, maybe 400 people. So within my ministry, you know, it's difficult. If we recruit from two streams, we recruit specific accountants, trained auditors, from a stream that we interview ourselves. We also take staff from the general panel of recruits for the ministry who come in as graduates, and you know, we can pick people off that panel and put them in our unit. I like the dual approach, because it's good to get graduates who have a different approach, who aren't necessarily trained in accountancy, etc., but perhaps have other skills. You know, I think we should have economists in my unit, because the two central finance ministries that we audit are very much, you know, economic management ministries, and it's great to have people in the unit who have that expertise and can bring a new approach or a nuanced approach to audit. The problem is, of course, is for the guys who come in who are trained specifically as internal auditors in my unit, there's very little scope. However, they do find other jobs in other units in the government sector, perhaps the head of internal audit unit, or I have lost staff to the European Court of Auditors and to the European Commission Audit Service. So there are outlets, but probably within the company, you know, quite limited, Ruth.
Do you collaborate across with other government departments in Ireland to try and promote people and to suggest people? Because I suppose that's another thing about whether it's something that you can actually help smooth career paths for them. Then it doesn't really matter to them so much necessarily whether they're moving into your department or whether they're moving into another department, as long as they're getting promotion and stretching.
No, we have a Heads of Internal Audit Forum, which includes all the heads of audit from the government departments in Ireland and a few allied state bodies. And we talk a lot. We talk about grading systems. We talk about issues just like this, you know, the problems of finding and retaining staff. And staff do move from one unit to another. The other thing about Ireland is that we have a common source of recruitment. We have a state body that oversees recruitment of all civil servants. This is to avoid any bias, you know, in individual departments. So we're sort of limited in the fact that we have to use this system of recruiting staff, but it does provide a certain degree of equity across the board, and you know, it should help us to take an even-handed approach in different government departments.
And Dermot, what tactics would you recommend for trying to retain internal auditors? You've touched on it slightly there, but could you elaborate maybe on the kinds of things that you see are most crucial at the moment for retaining the talent that you do have? Because obviously retention is usually worth quite a lot more than having to go out and trawl for new people and train them up. So yeah, that's always a challenge, especially when people are being inundated with offers elsewhere.
Yeah, I really won't pretend it's easy, Ruth. It's quite difficult, particularly in a public sector environment where, you know, I can't reward or offer financial rewards to my staff for good performance. You know, we use the word recognition a lot, and recognition can often mean that staff are delighted to be given extra responsibilities at the same salary that they're working at. You know, in other words, you need to enthuse them in the work that they're carrying out. They are public servants like all the staff in the ministry that they audit. So there is a sense of, I think, of vocation, without sounding too corny, as we say, of in government departments. So to try and enthuse them with interesting work, and on the EU side, of course, it's interesting that they can travel and they will have opportunities in European bodies to get other jobs. That's probably the one of the outlets that we can offer them, despite the problem of having to lose them.
And Marta, I mean, you're in a very different environment here. You have probably more flexibility on things like pay and rewards, but obviously as we're learning more and more, and as we found on the overview, that is definitely not the only answer at the moment to what people are looking for anyway. What do you have any particular tactics that you use for retaining people in particular?
Yes, I think that listening to Dermot, perhaps he considers that in a private company you have extra money to pay to everyone. No. We have also a lot of constraints, but there are some things that we can do. For example, we have a detailed onboarding program. We have a specific remuneration policy that we benchmark every 3 years to ensure that our auditors are fairly paid internally and considering the market. We have an audit academy that we have built ourselves, but with the collaboration of everything, as we are a lot of, we can build a good training program, and this is for free and everybody can do it. For sure it's in English, but everybody in audit speaks English. Well, as me, some of them, that means limited, but you can talk and you can exchange. There is a program that is also done inside audit and for audit about internal mentoring, and people appreciate a lot because the people with more expertise in the company can give good advice and can learn from the mentees. There are also something that I consider very relevant. There are exit interviews, always that somebody leaves. And with that, you can know really if there is any problem that has to be addressed. And these exit interviews are with audit people that is not in your market, not with your boss, with somebody outside to ensure that there is total openness and transparency. And there is also a newsletter. Now in times of smart working, to have a newsletter where everybody contributes and where it's like a kind of magazine to maintain the communication is something that people appreciate. And finally, there are clear functions and categories and annual objectives to ensure that the people that is working very well is recognized. That means there is a fixed part of salary and variable part of salary, and this is for all the auditors. And no, there is something else. There is a talent identification and promotion process. Then there is an analysis of the people on their contribution to the company, and if there is somebody that really deserves a promotion, this is discussed, and there is a standard process to do so. Then yes, we have many things, but not everything is paying extra salaries. This is the last of the possibilities, I would say.
That's interesting, because obviously some of the things that came out of the overview that we produced and from the roundtables was very much looking at both skills development, career development, progression opportunities, and also you touched, I think, a little bit on this idea of this newsletter, that the well-being and the actual culture, the environment, the reputation of an organisation, those things are becoming increasingly important, which is harder sometimes to establish, but very, very valuable at the moment when people can pick and choose whether. And Dermot mentioned it's a vocation, people want to work for the public sector. Equally, you mentioned, Marta, the newsletter, this idea about creating a team at a time when everyone is working more remotely and everything is even more important than ever, and creating that reputation, that buzz. You were talking about the academy, and that's interesting because we're going on the next section we were going to look at is what are the key skills that internal auditors will need in future, because we're very aware that skills are going to be, they're going to be different skills that we need in future. It's different styles of working, different types of jobs that internal audit is doing. We're increasingly doing much more broad, not nebulous audits, but audits on things that are less concrete, not so much finance, a lot more culture, a lot more to do with these big, wide issues that go across organisations. So the idea that transferable skills, people skills, whatever you call them, soft skills, become ever more important, and the IT skills become important but are changing dramatically from what they used to be. You don't need people who can work the IT quite so much as to understand what the potential of IT is, more than actually how to press a button. It's more now about understanding what it can do for you. So people have already begun on the poll. The question is, what are the skills for the internal auditors in the future? And I'll be asking people to select 3 amongst the top 10 skills for 2025 identified by the World Economic Forum. And you're already doing this, you're way ahead of me, but it's analytical thinking and innovation, technology, active learning and learning strategies, complex problem solving, critical thinking and analysis, creativity, originality and initiative, leadership and social influence, technology use, monitoring and control, technology design and programming, resilience, stress tolerance and flexibility, reasoning, problem solving and ideation. So I'm very interested to see what people are going to come up with here about the skills that we're going to need in the future, because there is quite a strong feeling that recruiting the people we've always recruited in the past in internal audit is not the way to the future, that the kinds of things internal auditors are being asked to do and the way they were being asked to work with organisations are changing. But equally that there are particular things like IT skills that are incredibly hard to get because everybody wants them. And also a sense that came up very strongly in the overview and around tables that internal audit teams and CAEs are now having to compete with so many other people in their own organisation for the same skills, that people need people who can talk to people, people who are empathetic, people who understand how to read a room, people who, all the things that are actually very hard to learn when you're doing things remotely all the time and you're not actually in an office trailing someone, are now so much more important. And all of these things, from IT skills to the soft transferable skills, are things that can be used in any department in your business, and everyone in every part of the business wants them. So you're competing internally, you're competing externally. It's a very different marketplace from what was there 5 years ago or 10 years ago, I think, for internal audit. I think we're seeing here that analytical thinking and innovation is in a long way ahead. 68% at the moment are saying that they need that. Critical thinking and analysis, not surprisingly, in internal audit, you'd hope that would be one that would be in demand. That presumably is not something that is that's also an old skill, but it's definitely something that is still needed. Technology use, monitoring and control. More and more, I think, certainly the respondents at the round table were saying that technology use is something that is no longer a wished for skill. It's something that every internal auditor is going to have to be able to use technology to a certain extent, even if they are not an expert in it. They are going to have to use things like data analytics and data in future and to understand what it can do for their organisation. Creativity is down at, and originality and initiative down at 24%. That is something that I think we're likely to see go up in the next few years. And complex problem solving. Sometimes you always wonder with these questions as well about how much they overlap with others again. But it's interesting when we're mapping them against the World Economic Forum to see how they're coming up. But yes, certainly at the moment, analytical thinking and innovation is by far away the top one. Can I scroll down? I can't scroll down. I can't see what's coming in at the bottom at the moment. Yes, no, that's not sure whether we're coming to the end of that or not, but I think that's analytical thinking and innovation is definitely where people are looking at the moment, which I think does chime very much with what we were seeing in the overview. And it would be very interesting to revisit that in a year or two and see where people have moved to on that. One question for you, Dermot, here is do you feel that we've talked a bit about data analytics? Do you think machines and artificial intelligence are going to be able to help us solve the skills shortage? Can we use these more in future to help internal audit get round the shortage of actual people, real people?
Yeah, short answer, no, I don't think so. Although, you know, as you say, artificial intelligence machines will help the quality of the product of the output internal audit. I think it may not solve the skills shortage because the requirement will just move up to a higher level. In other words, you will want individuals who can manage these artificial systems, who can manage these machines. And more importantly, know when to use them and when not to use them. For instance, I audit 2 government ministries that really have little or no expenditure to audit. Most of the expenditure is salaries and expenses. Most of the processes that we audit here in the 2 ministries are business processes around a central finance ministry. And there's really only 37 other organizations in the European Union that have that type of organization. So we can't go and look at AXA, or we can't go and look at Volkswagen and say, how do you do something? You know, auditing the budget process in my department is an audit that we carry out. How efficient is it? What is the process from January right through to November, perhaps when the budget is published? And is it done in an effective way? That's a process with little or no, you know, financial data involved, albeit there's a lot of estimation of economic indicators, etc. But it's really simply a business process with very little financial input into it. So I think the short answer is there will always be scope for an individual with good interpersonal skills where they can explain the use of the new IT or the new artificial intelligence, but convince the client that it's useful and gain their confidence in that they can share use of that information, so that internal audit becomes a trusted partner, a phrase we all like to use, rather than just coming along with that old assurance objective, which is still important, but not really adding any value or offering any help to the organization, which really I think we're all trying to move towards, particularly in the last 10 years.
So it's very much an and rather than an or, that it's in addition, it's an additional tool for internal audit, not a replacement for internal auditors or internal audit skills.
Yeah.
Apologies for noise in the background, by the way. Got things going on outside. Marta, how do you feel about that at AXA? Are you seeing anything where machines and artificial intelligence could actually solve the skills shortage, or again, is it an add-on that internal auditors should be using?
I think that artificial intelligence and the use of data analytics is absolutely essential. We can't base our conclusions now in a sampling of 10 items. When we can cross different files and having the complete information, then yes, we need now auditors working in data analytics. In AXA, we are doing a big push and doing a lot of training to ensure that our auditors know how to use this new tool. But finally, what you need is people that understand very well the business. Then you can use that analytics, but you need to know what you want to find exactly and why you want to find that. And with this conclusion, what you will do. That means when you will see a specific result and so what, and why you were asking for that. Then having data is essential. And we have all, not only IT people, every auditor has to know how to extract the information that they need. But then to do what? Then we still need a lot of analytical thinking. This is why we had these results in the pool. Critical thinking, people that knows how to add value to the organization and to the management. Then no, I don't think we will need less auditors. I think that we will need more professional auditors that are able not only to show results, but to analyze them and to extract the conclusions. And as Dermot said, if possible, to advance potential risks that the company doesn't know yet. Then it's needed, but it won't be the solution to have less auditors or to have auditors less prepared, at the contrary.
But I forgot to mention too, in my department, Ruth, is only 11 years old. It was set up just after the financial crisis when our banks practically wrecked our economy. So we're auditing areas of the organization that we've never actually audited before, and we're starting almost with a white blank piece of paper. So it does need a degree of creativity and initiative to sort of, look at the risks, number one, but then try and find a logical approach to how you assess the mitigation of those risks in the organization. So, you know, you do that creative mind, which perhaps is not what people associate with internal auditors. Some individual with his face buried in a book totting up figures. You know, it's a lot to do with interpersonal skills and trying to take a creative approach.
And in that case, that sort of brings us on to the next question here, which is about whether, if not IT, whether training can solve the skills shortage. Can you train people up internally? Can you train interpersonal skills? In particular, when you're all working remotely, that in itself is a challenge, especially when you're not looking just for people who can just number crunch, but you're training creativity and initiative and analysis and problem solving, curiosity, all these other things of that kind. Is that a possibility?
It's interesting that you asked me about that, because we are just elaborating ourselves inside Audit in AXA a course on communication with impact. Because we detected that there is not, it's useless to have wonderful conclusions and results if you are not able to transmit them to being impactful in your organization and to be listened. Then yes, we have these courses on soft skills that are not soft really, that are absolutely relevant. For the rest, as I told you, we have the Audit Academy with a lot of courses on cyber, on IT, on actuarial, on all kind of things that we need for our work. But it's true that training is not everything. For example, in our sector, in insurance, you don't find so many standard programs for internal audit of very technical insurance topics. This is not everywhere. Then we do a lot of training performed by ourselves, by experts, but we also use the learning on site. That means in the place where you work with professionals, with people that is doing really the job. Because sometimes the difference between the theory and the practice is big. And it's a perfect possibility to work with guest auditors, with people from the business that come to a specific audit to give you more insights about determined processes. Then training, yes, but also working with professionals that know a lot about the topic. And yes, technical skills and also empathy, communication, impact. This is very relevant because for audit, we need jewels. That means people that understand, that know how to express, that is nice, but has courage. And this is very difficult to achieve altogether.
And as we said, unfortunately, everybody else is looking for those people as well. So You're not just competing with other audit teams, you're competing with a lot of other people across the world in a lot of different departments. Dermot, do you have anything to add to that? We're running slightly late on the schedule, so I'll ask you to keep it short, but it would be interesting to know your take on that as well. Well,
training and access to third level education is something we can offer our staff, and actually they do find that very helpful. What I need to explain, in Ireland, I would suggest that 20 years ago, internal audit was not an attractive place to work in public sector departments, because the ones that had big units were mainly more inspection units than audit units. And training shows them that internal audit is a much more nuanced activity. It's not just going out inspecting things. It can offer far more to the organisation. So training is a way of attracting people in, showing them internal audit isn't what we thought it was, say, even 20 years ago.
No, I think that is very much a message as well that came out in the overview, that it's an attraction tool, it's a retention tool, and of course it's the tool for providing the people you need in future. When you can't buy in the ready-made, all singing, all dancing, hit the ground running people that probably everybody wants at the moment. Plus the skills are changing, as you said. It's about keeping people in jobs and training them up to be suitable in future. So that takes us to the third sort of section of this debate, which is, how can internal audit decide whether and ensure that companies comply with today's diversity requirements? And I think this has both a legal and a social side, because we have the legal requirements about not discriminating according to gender, sex, race, things of that kind. But we've also got a much broader definition here of socially. what people are expecting in terms of diversity and equality, in terms of things like age, retirement ages in different organisations differ and different countries differ, and social class, which is an incredibly difficult one. You could have people of every colour under the sun and every sexual orientation and every gender, and they all come from the same sort of school, and they've all had the same kind of background, and they've all been trained in accountancy, and they might not have particularly diverse thoughts or connections. So I think here diversity is so much an opportunity in the skills crisis for organisations and for internal audit specifically, because the deeper the pool of people you're trawling and the further you're looking for people, not only do you end up with a stronger team because it's accepted generally that more diverse teams perform better and have more perceptions and more views to bring to their job, but also, of course, you're just looking at a lot more people, which is also, ideal if you're looking for people in a very tight market. How would you, Marta, if we start with you, how do you ensure that your organisation complies with and understands all the full benefits of diversity and is actually using that to help deal with the skills crisis?
Well, I can tell you that this is not about audit. My company already had a lot of things on that respect, on ESG, guidelines on discrimination, non-discrimination, inclusiveness. This is already included in the selection process. Then the company is already working on that respect to avoid any discrimination, and audit is benefiting from that. Then in small companies, I suppose that the role of audit is more being advisor or participating in the working groups to establish that. In a company as mine, where this is absolutely established, what we can do is audit it. Auditing that to ensure that is well implemented, well understood, and that this works. And this is what we did recently. For example, we did an audit on equity pay to ensure that that was no gap, no by gender, by nationality, by sex, by whatever. And this is something that you can do. You can also ensure that the remuneration process is fair, but also that the description of the places are flexible and inclusive. And on that respect, for example, on audit, we have changed our job descriptions, and this is now more open to different kinds of profiles that it was in the past, just to be inclusive and to welcome other kind of skills that could fit in our teams. And yes, you can audit that to ensure that this is implemented, but I can tell you in my company, this is something very key, and we have not found problems. Also, being so multinational and with big, at least before COVID, and this will come back, geographical mobility, we are used to have different nationalities, different cultures, ethnics. This is really not a problem.
Dermot, how do you find this? Because again, you've got a very different sized organisation, a very different sized team. Diversity, obviously, if we're looking at it in its broadest meaning and in terms of opportunities for both internal audit and for the wider organisation, you don't have the same multinational team to draw on, but at the same time, you must sort of have similar issues about looking to trawl the deepest possible pool and the widest possible pool, and looking in sort of non-traditional places for internal auditors, I imagine, because of this idea that, the skills are changing, and that you need to be looking sort of further afield to people who do not necessarily come straight through the big four accountancy firms
Well, as you called up the name of my department, the Department of Public Expenditure and Reform, my department is the leading ministry for reform of not just the civil service, but the public service in general. And it's very important that the EDI in say particularly a police force, the diversity in the police force matches the level of diversity in the community. And I think that's really what our target should be, to look at what the diversity of our population is and try and match that with the organizations that basically run the country or look after all of our interests. our ministry has issued a sort of a guidance document in terms of what a maturity model would look like for an organization with, you know, a good diversity policy, which would include, you know, a vision statement of what the organization expects to be. And really, you should be moving from a position where you're simply compliant with good equality, diversity rules to where you're moving through sort of defined, okay, we're keeping up with the rules, to becoming mature and maybe then becoming leading. In other words, you're showing an example to every other organization, not just public sector, but perhaps public and private sector in our state. And, you know, Ireland, as you all know, has had a huge influx of people from many other member states and ethnicities over the last probably 30 years, since the early 90s, something we were never used to before that, unlike many other countries in Europe. So there was always the potential it would come as a culture shock, but I think we've grasped that there is an issue and it needs to be grappled with, both within the organisation and within the wider public sector.
I think diversity is certainly one of those issues that could be an entire overview in itself, and we've had to just sort of dip our toes into that, into the opportunities and the compliance issues as well, the risks there as well. But that's very interesting. I think for the next section of this, we're looking at how internal audit can help the governing bodies of an organisation manage the human capital risks it faces. The publication really made it clear that, or makes it clear that talent management is a massive priority for everybody at the moment, and that internal audit has to be raising the issues with their audit committee and management. They also looking at how, you know, this is not just a question of auditing talent management. It could be incorporated in so many other different bits of advisory work. It could be lots and lots of different types of audits, whether you're auditing HR or training and development, or your diversity specifically, or as we touched on in the first poll, or whether you're actually looking at offering advisory work and just highlighting risks and emerging risks and horizon scanning to see what kinds of things are coming up there, identifying risks and skills gaps for the organisation as a whole, identifying things coming down the track for the organisation, where the organisation might be having to move direction dramatically, as the power companies and utility companies, the end of fossil fuels in future, some of the green imperatives, things of that kind, where maybe there will be a big skills need that isn't there yet, but how organisations can position themselves. All of these things came out in the roundtables and in the overview, and are examined in more detail, along with quite a few suggestions for things that internal audit teams can do, depending on the maturity of their organisation now, but to help move them up the maturity. I mean, I know you just mentioned the maturity of an organisation is quite important there.
Yeah.
And I think this is an issue definitely where different people will be at different levels and will have different kinds of things approaching them in different parts of the world. But there are a whole load of suggestions in the overview that we've produced, which offer suggestions for things that internal audit can raise with their audit committee, that can raise with management, suggestions for actions that they can, actual practical actions that they can take now to make sure they are raising these issues and doing things and getting their organisation on the first setting. But if we just sort of paraphrase them quickly, Dermot, what do you think the key questions are that CAEs should raise at the moment when we're auditing human capital if they're in a mature organisation?
Yeah, well, we've just carried out a review of culture, which was at the initiative of the Internal Audit Unit, presented to the Management Board. And I think the first sign that the culture was healthy was the fact that they took on the project of a culture review. We ended up doing it in tandem with our HR unit, but it demonstrated that the ministry, you know, had a willingness to take the risks, because in Ireland, reviews and audits are often, you know, subject to freedom of information, and the results may not always turn out as you would expect. I think moving on from the culture review, I think if I'm brave enough in the next year or two, I might suggest that we extend it to a review of EDI, of, you know, of what is the level of, you know, equity, diversity in the organization and inclusion in the organization, to further extend, you know, the degree of how the department is treating its staff. And I think this is something that, you know, not every organisation will take on until they've seen how it happens in others, in other government departments perhaps. The one thing about our culture review was that there was no perceived problem at the beginning of the review. It was done for the sake of it as a good idea. I mean, in more technical ways, I mean, I've tried to move internal audit in our ministry from that assurance position really to a more proactive approach, where we look at issues, you know, while they're happening rather than until they've been completed, and we come along, as people often say, to bayonet the wounded, you know, tell the story of how they failed rather than trying to help while the project is in stream.
I think that's something a lot of internal auditors will sympathise with, about moving away from the bayoneting the wounded. I think that's a strong message there. I realise that we're cutting slightly into question time now. So Marta, I think it would be interesting to know your feelings on that, but also to look at, you've been collaborating, I believe, with HR, and it would just be interesting to know about the journey that you followed in your collaboration with HR here, and how that informs this.
Yes, to ensure that our staff and the rest of the staff is having everything that they need to be well protected and taking care of them. We have developed a lot of things. It's true that an audit on culture, Dermot, can be very important to see where you are and where you should be, and to go further. We did these audits in culture. The audits are not the problem itself. The question is what you do with the results later on. The actions to implement are not so easy. And I think that this is the problem, but this would be for another conference. Then what we have done, we have collaborated a lot with the chair in identifying talents, in job weighting categories, in defining in helping to define the functions in the company, because we have transversal knowledge of the company, and this helps a lot to understand how the organization operates. We have also done these audits on recruiting, equity and inclusion to ensure that we are following the ESG principles. We have also audited the remote agreements to ensure that there is all the protection of the employee, and that the digital disconnection is applied. And we do also audits on physical security in the workplace and during the business travels. Then we are not only auditing HR management, but also other topics around the well-being of the employee, and collaborating and advising when we are asked to. For sure, this has to be done always in collaboration with HR to ensure that we are, all of us, working for the best of the entity, and it works very well. It's not it's not always common to be asked or to be considered and to work together, but when it happens, it's fantastic.
Just, I fully accept your point. Internal audit and HR continue to be part of a culture implementation team that is now trying to put into place actions that arose from the original review report. So although some people might say, is that really what internal audit should be doing, actively being involved in an organization process? But I think it's well worthwhile. I think we can't start the process and not show enough enthusiasm to complete the process and help implement the recommendations.
Well, important to say that you need expert auditors on the field to really add value. This is not a work to be done with people that is in the first year of auditing, because they won't bring what is expected.
We contracted in specialists to help us to do the work. So it's a sort of a three-way team: internal audit, HR, and the specialist consultants.
Which again brings us back, unfortunately, to the fact that people are in short supply, and finding the people to do some of these special audits and specialist audits is increasingly difficult. We have cut very deeply into time for questions from the audience, I believe, but it would be nice just to field one or two to you if we have time. I've also been told that apparently we will be able to have some questions put up on the with answers on the internet afterwards, so on the website later. So if you do have a question that hasn't been answered, it might be answered on the website later. So don't despair. But I think some of the questions that are coming in at the moment are interesting. If you do have a question, please put it up on Slido, and I will pick just a couple before we run out of time on this. There's one here that's quite interesting, very topical. What is the impact of the current war on human capital? I imagine that's on human capital demands and on possible solutions to finding talent. Marta, are you seeing anything from the Ukrainian war at the moment that's affecting your recruitment and your human capital issues?
But not related with Ukrainian. It's just a war for good profiles, and it's really difficult to find the right ones. Why so? Because now for an auditor, you ask for everything. They have to cover, for sure, financial topics, but also IT and compliance and all the rest, and insurance operations in the case of AXA, and all the other skills on communication, empathy. Then everybody's looking for the same, and everybody wants this kind of profile in their departments. Then what audit can offer that others can offer in the same way? I would say that only in audit you can see all the processes of the company, and this global vision can help you a lot in future developments or in your career. Then this is what we offer: international environment and broad environment that allows you to learn a lot, not from one specific department of the company, but for the company as a whole.
And I think I'm just scanning down the other questions here just very, very quickly. There's one here, a question about how can you develop an inclusive environment for talent? Dermot, how do you feel? Do you have any tips on developing an inclusive environment?
Well, I suppose the more streams that you could recruit from is helpful, as I said at the very beginning of the webinar. In other words, take people from different sources, and there'll be a sharing of previous experiences and a sharing of talent and knowledge. And that's really the best way I can do it in a public sector environment. Show staff that you're concerned for their well-being and for their future by, for instance, investing in training for them, whether it be in a university degree, etc. In other words, that you value what they give you and you're prepared to invest in them as a member of staff.
And I think I'd like to go to you on that one, Marta, but I'm seeing that there are other questions coming in, so it's quite nice to keep sort of trying to get as many questions in as possible. There's one here that's come in. How do you balance between assurance and consultancy reviews? And have you noticed more interest from auditors for the consultancy aspect? That's a sort of interesting one about whether it's the changing nature of audit, whether it's maybe more sexy to be going for the consultancy side. Maybe consultancy has got a better reputation than straightforward assurance. What have you found there? Can you lure people in with the attraction of the consultancy side?
Well, first, let me say hello to Adele, who I know. Then how I balance between assurance and consultancy. Yes, we need to offer our services of consultancy to the management, but this could be a little tricky if we do everything on consultancy and we forget to do the risk audits that we have to cover to understand really which are the risks of our company. Then, yes, we had always the opportunity to do to do consultancy reviews, to do a work of advisory, but we don't need to forget which is our role of providing assurance in the sense of identifying the real risk for the company and prevent the management that this is there. Then I think this can be complementary. There is no problem on that. Just to have the right balance, I would say the 80-20. That means we have to cover our audit universe, and this has to be secure.
Yeah, I think my audit committee would not be very happy if I ignored the assurance piece. You know, essentially, we're looking at risks and we're the third line of assurance. So, you know, assurance will never go away. And if we have to do that properly, it might be a luxury, perhaps, to be able to offer the consultancy review if you have the expertise and the staff to do it. But and it will certainly increase your profile in the organization as a much more positive contribution to the organization, rather than the old-fashioned negative view of internal audit. But sorry, assurance will still be, as Martha says, you know, at least 70% for us, I think, in our unit of the work.
And last, just to squeeze one more in, is a question here. Do you think internal auditors should move into a business role to gain more practical experience? I'll go to you first, Marta, because obviously you're more sort of obviously a business than Dermot's environment, but it will be relevant to both of you.
Well, internal audit should move into business, or it would be good if you take internal auditors from the business. Then yes, I think that in any moment, you have to understand how your business is really working, and you have to find the way. If not, it's very difficult, if not with a lot of years of experience, and this can be motivating for some people, but not for everyone.
Yeah.
Dermot, do you feel that?
Yeah, I think it's something I'd like to do in the future. We haven't done it yet, but I would like the idea of a 1-year secondment or a swapping of staff between a division and the internal audit function, or indeed not just inside our organization but outside. Perhaps swap one of our staff for an accountancy firm or an industry firm, and help them in that sense to get a more diverse set of skills.
And that's particularly interesting because obviously that's switching environments completely, which is, you know, not learning about the business, but learning from other businesses, which I think is an interesting area, and one that we haven't had time to touch on. But I know that we've done a lot over the past sort of year, especially, and we've talked a lot about it in this overview, this idea about more collaboration between internal auditors across sectors and across organisations to try and learn from each other and develop skills. And I think that is a very interesting area we have no time to explore at all. I have a message here to say, can I round up the key messages and themes from the session? I don't think I can, because we're absolutely on 2 o'clock. However, I would urge everybody to go away and read the overview. It's a slightly awe-inspiring 7,000 words, but on the other hand, a lot of it is actually direct quotes from people who are part of the roundtable, so more of what you've got here really, but hearing other people's views. And it also does have some very practical tips and advice for people. So I do urge you to read it and to check the website. And thank you so much to all the participants who joined us. And thank you so much to Marta and to Dermot for being such interesting and informative speakers on this.
Pleasure.
Thank you, Ruth. A pleasure.